Welcome to Silent Screams, where the darkest tales come alive in a haunting symphony of whispers. Tonight, we'll guide you through the chilling unknown. So, dim the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare to lose yourself in the shadows. The night was unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. I had always loved solitude, the kind of silence where I could feel my own heartbeat, but this was different. The air felt heavy, pressing against my chest like an unseen weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It all started with a dare. My friends, always seeking thrills, had convinced me to spend the night in the old Ravenswood Manor, a place shrouded in whispers of unspeakable horrors. The house had been abandoned for decades, its history wrapped in layers of tragedy and unanswered questions. They called me brave, reckless even, but as I stood before the creaking iron gates, I felt none of that courage. Only dread. The gates groaned as they swung open, as if reluctant to let me pass. A cold breeze swept through, carrying with it the faint scent of decay and something metallic, almost like blood. I hesitated, but the mocking laughter of my friends echoed in my mind. I couldn't back out now. Clutching my flashlight, I stepped forward. The house loomed ahead, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring into my soul. Vines snaked up the cracked stone walls, and the once grand double doors hung crookedly, one slightly ajar. I pushed it open further, the hinges screaming in protest. Inside, the air was stifling, thick with the smell of mildew and rot. My footsteps echoed eerily in the cavernous hall as I swept the flashlight around. Dust motes danced in the beam, revealing remnants of a life long forgotten. A toppled chandelier lay in a heap, its crystals scattered like shards of broken dreams. Faded portraits lined the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow me. One particular painting caught my attention, a woman with pale skin, dressed in black, her lips slightly parted as though mid-sentence. Her eyes were piercing, almost alive. I shivered and moved on. The staircase creaked with every step, the sound bouncing off the walls like a warning. As I reached the landing, I thought I heard a faint whisper. I froze, straining to listen. Nothing. Just the wind, I told myself, though I wasn't sure I believed it. I turned toward one of the bedrooms, its door slightly ajar. Inside, the room was untouched, as though someone had just left. The bed was neatly made, its covers surprisingly free of dust. A music box sat on the nightstand, its lid open to reveal a delicate ballerina poised mid-spin. I reached out, and the moment my fingers brushed the box, it began to play. The haunting melody filled the room, its notes strangely discordant, as though the song had been corrupted over time. And then I saw her. A figure stood in the corner, barely visible in the dim light. She was draped in a tattered dress, her hair falling in tangled strands over her face. My breath caught as she lifted her head, revealing hollow sockets where her eyes should have been. She smiled, a grotesque, unnatural smile that chilled me to the core. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. Darkness swallowed me whole, and for a moment, I was blind. The music box continued its eerie tune, but now it seemed louder, more insistent. I fumbled for the flashlight, my fingers trembling, and when I finally turned it on, she was gone. The room was empty. Or so it seemed. My heart pounded as I scanned the space. The music box was closed now, silent. But then, a faint giggle echoed behind me. I spun around, and there she was again, closer this time. Her face was inches from mine, and I could feel her cold breath on my skin. Before I could scream, the door slammed shut, and the flashlight flickered out. The darkness was absolute. I could hear her, though, her ragged breathing circling me. Something brushed against my arm, and I yelped, stumbling backward. My hand found the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The air went still, the sound ceased, and the room felt empty. I managed to push the door open and staggered out into the hallway. My heart was racing, my mind reeling, but there was no time to think. A deep, guttural growl echoed from downstairs. It wasn't human. I turned toward the staircase, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A shadow, impossibly tall and wide, stretched across the walls, its movements jerky and unnatural. It was coming up the stairs, each step deliberate and agonizingly slow. I backed away, my legs shaking, until I hit the wall. Then, a voice. Low, raspy, and filled with malice. You shouldn't have come here. I froze. The voice wasn't coming from a person, it was coming from the very walls themselves. A deep, guttural growl echoed once more, reverberating through the floorboards and making the air around me feel thick, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. My legs were stiff, my feet glued to the floor. The shadow grew larger, its movements more erratic, as if it were struggling to maintain its form. It crawled up the stairs, its long, unnatural limbs scraping against the wood with a sound that made my skin crawl. I wanted to look away, but something, some force, compelled me to watch. The shadow reached the top of the stairs, and for a moment, it seemed to hesitate, as if considering its next move. Then, with an inhuman, jerking motion, it darted toward me, faster than any creature should be able to move. I stumbled back, slamming into the doorframe of a nearby room. My heart hammered in my chest, the sound deafening in my ears, as if it too was warning me of something unspeakable. The door, which had been slightly ajar, creaked open under the force of my body's panic. I tumbled inside, blindly, and slammed the door shut behind me. The room was freezing, the temperature dropping so fast I could see my breath in the air. I couldn't see much, only vague shapes in the darkness. The flashlight was still in my hand, its beam flickering weakly, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to keep the darkness at bay. I stumbled further into the room, my hands outstretched in front of me to feel for anything to hold on to. And then I felt it. Cold fingers brushed against my wrist. I yanked my hand back, my body stiff with terror, but the fingers followed. Someone was there, just out of reach, lingering in the darkness. The temperature dropped again, and the unmistakable scent of rot filled my nostrils, overwhelming me. It was like the very air had turned to death. The whispers came then, soft at first, like a wind brushing past my ear. But they grew louder, until they felt like they were inside my skull, pressing against my brain. Words I couldn't understand, scraping, guttural sounds that seemed to crawl into my mind, poisoning my thoughts. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered back to life, casting a dim, ghostly light around the room. The shadows around me twisted and undulated, taking on shapes, twisting faces, hands reaching from the walls, eyes blinking in the darkness. And then, I saw her. The woman from the painting. She was standing in front of me, her face impossibly pale. Her eyes hollow and dark. Her lips, parted, stretched into that same grotesque smile. Her body was unnaturally thin, her limbs too long, too thin. Her dress hung from her like a tattered veil, its fabric shredded as though it had been torn apart by something savage. She didn't move at first. She just stood there, staring at me. Her smile never faltered. And then, in a voice that sent ice through my veins, she whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." The words felt like they were squeezing the life out of me, choking me. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing in, the air growing thicker with each passing second. And then, the floor beneath me cracked. A low, sickening sound, like the earth itself was about to split open. I stumbled backward, my legs giving out beneath me, and I fell to the ground, my hands reaching out for anything to stop my descent into the blackness below. But it was too late. The floor gave way. I fell through what seemed like an endless tunnel, tumbling, spinning in complete darkness. I couldn't tell up from down, and every time I thought I was about to hit the ground, the fall stretched on, stretching my sense of time and reality. There was nothing, no walls, no floor, just the disorienting sensation of free fall. Then, with a violent jolt, I hit the ground. I gasped for air, my chest tight, the pain sharp in my bones. I tried to stand, but my legs couldn't support me. My hands scraped against the cold floor, and when I looked up, I saw something that made my heart freeze. I was no longer in the house. The room had changed. The walls were blackened and scorched, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning wood. Shadows stretched and writhed on the walls, as though they were alive, moving with a will of their own. The faint sound of chains dragging across the floor echoed in the distance, like some unseen monster was moving in the dark. I pushed myself to my feet, my head spinning. I could hear whispers, faint, like voices calling from far away. But the voices were wrong. They weren't human. They were distorted, warped, their tones high and shrill. I could barely understand them, but I knew they were speaking of me. They've come. They've brought him. The voice was strange, so far away, yet so close. It sounded like it was coming from inside my own skull. And then, I saw it. A figure standing in the center of the room, shrouded in black. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its face was obscured by a dark, tattered hood. But the eyes, those eyes, burned bright red, like twin embers in the void. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching me with those piercing eyes. My heart raced as I stumbled back, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The floor beneath me groaned, the wood creaking, and then the walls began to move. They shifted, warping in on themselves like a living, breathing thing, as if the house itself were alive, constricting around me. The whispers grew louder, swirling in a chaotic crescendo. My vision blurred as the shadows in the room twisted and merged, taking on shapes I could barely comprehend. Faces, arms, legs, all contorting and twisting in ways that defied nature. And then, I felt it. A hand, cold, icy, gripped my shoulder, squeezing with an unnatural strength. I spun around, but there was no one there. Only the presence, the oppressive, suffocating presence of something that didn't belong. Something that had been waiting for me. The temperature dropped. Again, plunging me into a freezing darkness, and as I stood there, paralyzed, I heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching from behind. I turned, and that's when I saw it. A shadow, no, a shape, climbing up the walls, its eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light, its mouth opening wide, impossibly wide. It reached out for me, its fingers elongating, stretching toward my face. And I screamed. But there was no sound. Only silence. A silence that was deafening.